New York streets were never kind, especially to those who walked them in darkness. Emma Sinclair had learned that the hard way. Blinded by an illness in childhood, she was abandoned by the very people who should have protected her, her parents. Left to fend for herself, she refused to let her disability define her. Every morning, she navigated the bustling city with nothing but her cane, her sharp mind, and a heart unwilling to surrender. Life had never been easy, but she had carved her own way through the chaos. Selling raffle tickets became her means of survival.
Hello, I'm the storyteller of the channel, and I would like to ask for a second of your time to subscribe, activate the notification bell, and like the video so that YouTube can take our story to more people who are passionate about stories like this. Thank you, and without further ado, let's continue with our story.
Not just for herself, but for children who, like her, had been forgotten by the world. She stood on the same corner every evening, calling out to strangers who rarely stopped. Some ignored her, some pitied her, and a few, just a few, saw past her blindness and noticed the strength in her voice. But kindness was rare in a city built on indifference. She had learned to expect rejection. Still, Emma never allowed bitterness to take root. She smiled through the cold, through the rain, through the countless nights when hunger gnawed at her stomach. She had long accepted that the world was unfair, but that didn't mean she had to become like it. She had made peace with her solitude, believing that people only showed up when they needed something, and they always left when they didn't. Yet, deep down, a part of her still longed for something she never admitted out loud. She had seen love in movies, overheard it in whispered conversations at coffee shops, felt its warmth in the laughter of passing couples. But love? Love was not meant for people like her. She had no place in those stories. No prince would ever stop in the middle of the street for a blind girl selling raffle tickets. But what if, just once, fate decided to be unpredictable? What if, against all logic, someone looked at her and didn't see a struggle, didn't see a burden, but saw something else entirely? What if, one evening, when the rain poured and the world seemed colder than ever, someone finally stopped? Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because, for the first time, they felt they had to? And what if that someone was the last person anyone would expect? Alexander Grayson had everything. At least, that's what the world believed. A fortune built on ruthless decisions, an empire that stretched across industries, and a name that commanded fear and respect. Yet for all his wealth, he lived in a fortress of solitude. Love, compassion, trust. Those were weaknesses, distractions that had no place in his world. He had learned long ago that emotions were liabilities, and he had no interest in carrying burdens that would slow him down. From the moment he inherited his father's failing company, Alexander had vowed never to be weak. He had clawed his way to the top, making enemies, breaking alliances, and forging his own path with sheer force of will. He built walls around his heart, higher and stronger with every betrayal he witnessed. The world was a battlefield, and he refused to be the one left bleeding. He played the game like a master, ensuring that no one ever got close enough to see the man behind the empire. His life was measured in numbers, profits, losses, stock value. People were assets or obstacles, nothing in between. He had no time for fleeting sentiments or meaningless connections. He had seen what love did to men like him. It made them reckless, made them vulnerable. His father had been a prime example, ruined by a woman who walked away, leaving behind nothing but shattered trust. Alexander had vowed never to let that happen to him. Women were easy distractions, carefully chosen and just as easily discarded. No one got past his carefully crafted defenses. If they tried, he made sure they regretted it. He had no interest in fairy tales, no patience for emotional complications. He ruled his world with an iron grip, convinced that this was the only way to survive. But deep down, in the rare moments of silence, when the city lights cast long shadows across his penthouse, he felt it, a hollowness he refused to name. Maybe that was why, on a stormy evening when fate demanded his attention, something shifted. A moment so small, so insignificant on the surface, yet destined to unravel everything he had built. He wasn't looking for a change. He wasn't searching for meaning. But the universe had a way of forcing even the most stubborn souls to look twice. And on that fateful night, he did. And that was the beginning of everything. The storm had turned New York into a sea of chaos. Rain pounded the sidewalks, car horns blared through the night, and Alexander Grayson, oblivious to it all, moved through the crowd with purpose. His phone was pressed to his ear, his mind tangled in the details of a deal that couldn't afford mistakes. He didn't see the woman in his path, didn't register her presence until the impact sent her small frame stumbling back. Instinctively, his hand shot out, catching her just before she hit the wet pavement. Irritation flared in his chest. Another delay, another meaningless interaction. But then, something strange happened. As his gaze fell on her face, he noticed the absence of recognition in her eyes. The way her fingers tightened around the cane in her other hand. She was blind. The realization settled in like a weight, foreign and unexpected. He had spent his life ignoring the struggles of others. Why, then, did this moment feel different? "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but steady. No trace of anger, no expectation for pity, just quiet resilience. She adjusted her grip on the stack of Raffle tickets in her hand and held one out to him. "Would you like to buy a ticket? The money goes to help children with disabilities." Her words were simple, her request straightforward. There was no begging, no desperation, just an offer. For a man who had never entertained chance, who controlled every aspect of his life with meticulous precision, the idea of buying a Raffle ticket was almost laughable. And yet, something in him wavered. Maybe it was the way she stood there, unfazed by the world that had long chosen to overlook her. Maybe it was the way she didn't expect anything from him beyond that one moment. Without thinking, he reached into his coat, pulled out $100 bill, and pressed it into her palm. "One ticket," he muttered, barely understanding why he was doing it. "Thank you," she replied, tucking the money away as if it were just another transaction. No hesitation, no excitement over the large bill. She simply handed him a single slip of paper, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest second. And just like that, the moment was over. He could have walked away, should have walked away. But as he turned, stepping back into the storm, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set something in motion. Something irreversible. Fate, after all, had a strange sense of humor. Days passed, and the memory of that stormy evening should have faded into the blur of Alexander's routine. But it didn't. The small Raffle ticket remained on his desk, an anomaly among contracts worth millions. It was absurd, really. He had bought it on impulse, without a second thought. Yet, when his secretary mentioned the winning numbers, a slow realization settled over him. He had won $50,000, a sum that meant nothing to him, but everything to the woman who had sold him the ticket. Logic told him to ignore it. This was fate's random cruelty at play, nothing more. But something about it gnawed at him. He wasn't a man who believed in signs, yet the coincidence felt too precise to dismiss. He found himself back on that same street corner, searching for her among the faceless crowd. When he finally spotted her, standing in the cold with those same Raffle tickets in hand, he felt something unfamiliar. Not pity, not guilt, something deeper. Emma Sinclair, her head tilted slightly at the sound of his voice. The recognition wasn't visual, but something in the way she still told him she remembered. "You sold me a ticket the other night," he continued. "It won." He expected surprise, maybe even excitement. Instead, she simply nodded. "Then congratulations," she said, as if it had nothing to do with her. He had never met someone so impossible to read. He extended the check toward her, fully expecting her to take it. But she didn't. "I can't accept that," she said, her voice firm but polite. "The money belongs to you. That's how raffles work." He narrowed his eyes, thrown off by her refusal. Anyone else would have grabbed it without hesitation. "You need this," he said more than asked. Her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I need a lot of things, but I won't take what isn't mine." For the first time in years, he was impressed. He had built his world around people who would sell their souls for far less. Yet here was a woman who wouldn't accept a fortune handed to her. And so, in an act just as impulsive as buying that ticket, he made a different offer. "Then work for it," he said. "I need an assistant. The position's yours if you want it." It was reckless, illogical, and yet, even before she answered, he knew this was the real gamble. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he wanted to win or lose. Emma had never stepped into a world like his. Alexander's office towered over the city, a fortress of power and precision, filled with people who moved with purpose. She wasn't intimidated. Life had trained her to stand firm in unfamiliar places, but she could feel the weight of expectation in every whispered conversation around her. A blind woman as Alexander Grayson's assistant, the murmurs were unavoidable. Yet, she ignored them, just as she had ignored every doubt ever cast her way. She wasn't here for approval. She was here to prove, once again, that she was more than what the world saw. At first, their working relationship was defined by unspoken tension. Alexander wasn't used to explaining himself. He wasn't used to adjusting his ways for anyone. But Emma was different. She challenged him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Not with defiance, but with quiet strength. She learned his world quickly, navigating his schedule, organizing his empire with a precision that left even his most seasoned employees impressed. She refused special treatment. She refused to be underestimated. And somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing her as different. He just saw her. The moments between them became something else. A brush of hands as she handed him a file. A pause in conversation that lasted a beat too long. He found himself lingering in meetings just to hear her voice, watching the way she tilted her head when deep in thought. It unnerved him how easily she had infiltrated his carefully controlled existence. He had spent a lifetime building walls, yet she had walked right through them, without force, without demand. She simply existed, and that was enough to shake him. Emma felt it too. The way his tone softened when he spoke to her. The way his presence, once cold and distant, now carried something warmer. She had promised herself she wouldn't fall. He was everything she had learned to avoid. Powerful, unpredictable, emotionally guarded. But the way he treated her, the way he listened, the way he had chosen her for more than pity or obligation, it made resisting him impossible. She told herself it was foolish, but her heart had already decided. One evening, after a long day, he walked her to the elevator instead of letting his driver take her home. The city lights stretched before them, casting shadows that felt too intimate, too charged. "You changed things," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I don't know how, but you did." She turned toward him, her hands gripping the railing, as if grounding herself. "And is that a bad thing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering, he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that shattered every rule he had lived by. And in that moment, there was no fortune, no power, no past wounds. Only the undeniable truth that sometimes love finds a way, even where it's least expected.